You watched one 15-second video, a girl tapping her pen, losing her train of thought, forgetting why she walked into a room. The caption said, "Signs you have ADHD and didn't know it." And something in your chest went cold, because that's you. That's literally you. So you watched another one and another. And by video number 12, you weren't just curious anymore, you were convinced. But here's the question nobody on that app is going to ask you. How many of those signs are actually ADHD? And how many of them are just what it feels like to be a tired, overstimulated human being in 2026? Today we're going to answer that question for real. The algorithm isn't diagnosing you. It's profiling you. Let's be clear about what's actually happening when you fall into one of these rabbit holes. TikTok doesn't know your medical history. It doesn't know your childhood, your sleep schedule, or whether you've been stressed out of your mind for the last 6 months. What it knows is your watch time. The moment you pause on a video about forgetfulness, the algorithm logs that as interest, and it starts feeding you more content built around the same handful of symptoms: distraction, disorganization, forgetfulness, impulsivity. Because those symptoms are common. Not rare. Common. They show up in anxiety, in depression, in burnout, in plain old sleep deprivation, and yes, in ADHD too. The app isn't built to be accurate, it's built to keep you watching, and confirmation bias does the rest of the work for free. Once you believe you might have ADHD, your brain starts collecting evidence for it and quietly ignoring everything that doesn't fit. There's also a quieter mechanism at play here, one psychologists call the Barnum Effect, the tendency to read vague, broadly applicable statements as uniquely and specifically true about you. You sometimes feel like your brain is working against you. Sounds like a revelation when you hear it in a 15-second clip with dramatic music behind it. But strip away the editing and the trending sound, and it's a sentence that applies to nearly everyone who has ever been tired, stressed, or overwhelmed. The format is doing emotional work that the content itself hasn't earned. Why these symptoms feel so universal? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of the signs of ADHD circulating online aren't specific to ADHD at all. Difficulty focusing? That happens with anxiety, with depression, with chronic stress, and honestly, with just not sleeping enough. Losing your train of thought mid-sentence? That can be a tired brain, an overloaded brain, or a brain that's simply been context switching between 4 apps and a group chat for the last 3 hours. Procrastination? That's not a diagnosis. That's most of the human species. The clinical definition of ADHD requires something TikTok never mentions. The symptoms have to be persistent, present since childhood in most cases, and severe enough to meaningfully impair your life across multiple settings. Not just annoying, but actually disruptive at work, at home, and in relationships, consistently for years. A bad week doesn't qualify. A stressful semester doesn't qualify. That distinction is the entire difference between watching a relatable video and having an actual disorder. The real cost of getting this wrong. This isn't just an academic nitpick. Self-diagnosing based on a 15-second video has real consequences. If what you're actually dealing with is anxiety or burnout, and you convince yourself it's ADHD, you stop looking for the thing that would actually help you because you think you already found the answer. You might even start treating yourself for the wrong problem, building your whole identity and your coping strategies around a label that doesn't fit, which means the real issue keeps running quietly underneath, untouched. And there's a second cost that doesn't get talked about enough. Every time someone self-diagnoses incorrectly and says so publicly, it makes it just a little harder for people with real, clinically diagnosed ADHD to be taken seriously. The condition starts to look like a personality trend instead of a neurodevelopmental condition that genuinely reshapes how someone functions. Both groups lose. The person who needed something else doesn't get help, and the person who actually has ADHD gets dismissed as just following a trend. There's a third cost too, and it's the one people feel but rarely name. Identity gets built around the label before the label has actually been earned. Once you tell yourself and everyone around you that your brain works a certain way, you start interpreting every future struggle through that lens, even when the lens doesn't fit. A missed deadline stops being a missed deadline and becomes proof of something you decided about yourself months ago without anyone qualified ever weighing in. That's not self-awareness. That's a story quietly hardening into a belief system, one video at a time. So, how do you actually know? Here's where we stop tearing things down and start building something useful. There is a real way to know, and it's not a quiz, not a TikTok sound, not a checklist you fill out alone at 1 a.m. Clinically, ADHD is assessed by a licensed psychologist or psychiatrist through a structured evaluation. One that looks at your developmental history starting in childhood, often involves input from people who knew you growing up, like parents or teachers, and screens specifically for other conditions that mimic ADHD symptoms like anxiety, depression, learning disorders, or trauma responses. That last part matters enormously because the overlap between ADHD and anxiety alone is massive. They can look almost identical from the outside while needing completely different treatment. A real evaluation untangles that. A TikTok video cannot. If you genuinely suspect something is going on, the move isn't to diagnose yourself in the comments section, it's to track what you're actually experiencing. Write down specific situations, not vague feelings. When does this happen? How long has it been happening? And how much is it actually costing you? Then bring that to a professional who can ask the questions an algorithm never will. What this isn't. To be fair to the other side of this conversation, this isn't an argument that ADHD content online is worthless, or that people sharing their real diagnosed experience are doing something wrong. Plenty of creators with an actual diagnosis have done real good, helping people recognize something that doctors missed for years, especially women and adults who were overlooked as children because ADHD doesn't always look hyperactive. That visibility matters. The problem isn't ADHD awareness. The problem is treating a 15-second pattern match as equivalent to a clinical evaluation. Awareness should be the door that gets you to ask better questions, not the answer itself. The real takeaway. So here's what to actually take from this. Your brain doing something frustrating does not automatically mean it's broken, and it definitely doesn't mean an app figured out something about you that took your own life this long to notice. Curiosity is good. Noticing patterns in yourself is good. But the next step isn't a diagnosis you give yourself between videos. It's a conversation with someone trained to actually tell the difference between a label that fits and a label that's just comfortable. Your mind deserves more than a guess pulled from an algorithm built to keep you scrolling. It deserves an actual answer, not a trend, not a sound clip. An answer built on real evidence that you can actually trust enough to act on. If this gave you something to actually think about instead of just another thing to worry about, that's the whole point of this channel. Subscribe if you want more of your mind decoded with substance instead of noise. And drop a comment. What's a piece of online advice you believed for way too long before you actually questioned it?